Welcome to this Gŵyl Crime Cymru Festival event, and welcome to Aberystwyth. Croeso i'r digwyddiad Gŵyl Crime Cymru Festival hwn, a chroeso I Aberystwyth. Aberystwyth, the cultural capital of Wales, home to Aberystwyth University and the National Library of Wales, once home to Welsh princes. The Biarritz of Wales is the jewel in the crown of Cardigan Bay's stunning coastline and home to hugely successful TV drama Hinterland. And now, the streets that have become familiar to fictional D.I. Mathias's many fans are getting ready to welcome celebrities from the worlds of crime fiction and crime drama, because Aberystwyth is home to Wales's first ever international crime fiction event, Gŵyl Crime Cymru Festival. During the early May bank holiday weekend of 2022, Aber, as the town is affectionately known, will play host to a multitude of events that will offer something for every fan of crime fiction and drama. Internationally successful authors will entertain and meet readers in historic buildings. Pub quizzes will bring together authors and readers. Writing workshops, meet the agent sessions, and informal readings will help encourage and develop new writing talent. And in sparkling celebration of new Welsh talent, a champagne reception for Crime Cymru's first crime novel competition winners. This will be an Aber bank holiday weekend like no other. So, come for the crime fiction and take Cymru home in your hearts. Rydym yn edrych ymlaen yn fawr iawn at eich croesawu I Aberystwyth ac I Geredigion.
Welcome to event number 12 of the Gŵyl Crime Cymru Digital Online Festival. As you know, this is Wales's first international crime fiction festival. We've received over 3,000 ticket registrations, which is something we're very grateful for. Now this evening, we're honoured to be joined by Lee and Andrew Child, two of the highest profile names in the crime writing world. Lee and Andrew will be telling us about the handing over of the Jack Reacher series of thrillers, and we hope sharing an insight into what the future has for Jack. We're also pleased to be able to say that Crime Cymru are supporting Welsh bookshops as part of our events. Our partner bookshop for this evening is Griffin Books of Penarth. Griffin Books have generously provided a secret discount code, CRIME20, for purchases of not only Andrew and Lee's books, but mine as well. Really kind of them. The discount will last from now until midnight on the 30th of May. A link to Griffin Books was in your join up email and is on the listing for this YouTube page. We will also post a link in the chat function, which we hope you will all use enthusiastically. If you have any questions you'd like to ask of Lee or Andrew, please post them in chat. And towards the end of the session, Amy Williams, one of our Crime Cymru members, will ask them on your behalf. As a special treat for you this evening, we're also going to be enjoying the Crime Cymru equivalent of desert island discs. I've asked our guests to imagine they've been shipwrecked, and before abandoning ship to join a lifeboat heading to a desert island, they are given a choice. Four books from the ship's library to take with them. Books that perhaps have influenced their lives and they'd love to be able to read again. And let's face it, desert island discs would need electricity, and our desert island doesn't have any. So now, let's move on. It's reported that Lee Child's Jack Reacher series sells a book worldwide every 9 seconds. Quite a staggering achievement. It's now widely known that Lee is about to retire from writing. So what does the future hold for Reacher? Let's find out. Please welcome from his home in the United States, the Reacher guy himself, Lee Child. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you very much. What a pleasure and a privilege it is to be there. And I got to say, Aberystwyth looked awfully nice on that movie. So I guess you had to wait to find a good weather for that shoot, right?
No, it's sunny one day in 10 at least here.
Oh, that's pretty good.
We're also very fortunate this evening because we have an opportunity to meet someone who might possibly know more about Lee Child than anybody else. In 2019, when rumours began to circulate that Lee was going to retire, many of us wondered if we'd seen the last of a character who'd become so familiar to us. What we didn't know was that Lee wanted the story of Reacher to continue as much as anyone else. But he wanted to take a step back, to enjoy some free time and to do some of the things in life that a full-time commitment to writing doesn't allow. But to who could he turn? The answer was close to home, but would he say yes? Let's ask him how that conversation went. Please welcome Andrew Child.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to, and as Lee said, a privilege too, to be part of this conference. You know, Wales has played quite a large part in our lives, so it is wonderful to be part of a Welsh crime fiction festival. But I guess that if there hadn't been that conversation that you mentioned back in 2019, I probably wouldn't be here right now, because I had no idea it was coming. You know, I'd heard Lee a couple of times over the years saying that maybe someday he'd retire. But, you know, I kind of tried to put that out of my mind. I tried to pretend that I'd never heard it, because in my mind, I associated Lee retiring with there being no more Reacher. And as the first person to have read a Reacher book, as the oldest and original Reacher fan, I just couldn't stand the idea of there being a world without Jack Reacher. So really, when he sprang this idea on me, you know, I had all different conflicting emotions, you know, surprise, shock, horror. But the overriding one was, well, what about Reacher? We've got to have more Reacher in the world. So the thing that really hit me out of that conversation was there's not really an option here, because I can't stand the idea of, you know, every year not looking forward to the new Reacher book. So in the end, there was only one way I could answer that question.
So Lee, did you use the bent arm method, the brown envelope method, or were you cleverer than that?
Well, the background to it was that everything I've done as a writer is based on my experiences as a reader. And, you know, I've been reading a long time. I taught myself to read when I was 3, because I was intensely jealous of my elder brother going to primary school and being able to do all this stuff. So I sort of taught myself to read, and I've been reading therefore for 63 years now. And I've had numerous favorite series. I've had tremendous experiences, but you get let down from time to time by authors that get tired, bored, they start phoning it in. And what I promised myself, and therefore by extension the reader and the publisher, is that I would never ever phone it in. And I never have, and I'm very proud of that. Every single book that I've done was the best I could possibly do. But it was in the back of my mind that it was coming. You know, maybe not the next book, maybe not even the one after, but it was coming. I was running out of gas. I was just feeling not up to it. Plus also, as a young person, I hated the way that old people stuck around forever. You know, they would not get off the stage and leave room for the next generation. I hated that in every aspect of life, including the arts. And so I was really somewhat hoist on my own petard. So I knew I had to stop doing it. And initially I thought that would be the end of Reacher, but then I got this it was really a daydream. You know, I wish I could take some magic potion and wake up tomorrow 15 years younger with all that energy and all the ideas that I had 15 years ago. But obviously that was a fantasy until it suddenly occurred to me, well, wait a minute. Andrew is obviously his own person. He's obviously a separate individual, but DNA-wise and upbringing-wise and everything about us is very similar. And I thought, wait a minute, up the street, there is me 15 years younger. So then it became a tactical decision. How was I going to spring this on him? And the way I did it was, we were traveling together from where we live in Wyoming. We were traveling down to Denver, which is about a 2.5-hour drive, for Andrew's book launch for his book that year. And I drove down, we did the event, and he drove back. And it was January, and therefore in this part of the world, that meant fearsome winter weather. And in fact, on the drive back, there was a huge blizzard. And what we get in Wyoming is called a ground blizzard, where you have possibly a 50 or 60 mile an hour wind blowing horizontally, and the snow is blowing kind of about a foot above the ground in this impenetrable mass. And you have no clue where the road is. And so you're basically hoping for the best, and you're looking at your GPS and thinking, okay, it's a bit left here, it's a bit right here. And Andrew was driving, and real white knuckle, trying to keep us both alive. So I thought, here's a great time to introduce the subject, because he's going to hear it, but he's not going to focus on it immediately. He's going to think about it afterward. So I well remember it. We were literally in this whiteout condition, no clue where the road was. It was pretty awful. And I said, I'm going to quit. Would you consider taking over the series?
Did you nearly steer off the road, Andrew?
Well, if I'd known where the road was, I could answer that question. I actually remember very clearly saying to Lee, you know what, we've got about a 50% chance of 50% chance we get home, 50% chance we wind up in the ditch. It was that kind of weather. Scary.
So how did you feel when it sunk in that your brother was actually suggesting that you take on this mantle? Hell of a responsibility.
Well, it was, and really a hell of an honor too, because Reacher is this incredible creation, this incredible worldwide phenomenon, and the idea that he would trust anybody with it, let alone me, was mind-blowing. So that was the first thing that I had to come to terms with. Second thing was then a kind of more practical idea, which was, well, as you said, it's a responsibility and it's a challenge, and am I up to it? And problem I have in life, and this has caused me so much trouble over the years, is anything that sounds like a challenge, I just can't turn it down. I can't walk away from it. In fact, when I was a little kid, Dad he knew this, and if there was something that he thought was too hard for me to do, he would always say, "Oh, Andrew will never be able to do that," because he knew that as soon as he said that meant I was going to, I was going to do it twice and take photographs. So the next thing was when I realized that basically this was the biggest challenge I'd ever faced. That was something that made me inclined to do it. And then, as I said earlier, the third part was the realization that if I said no, then there would be no more Reacher. And I've been living with Reacher's been like an invisible extra brother for the two of us for more than a quarter of a century. When we got together, we would, if we were hanging out, if we were watching a movie or listening to something on the news or just watching some scenario unfold on the street, time after time we'd say, "Oh, well, what would Reacher think about that? What would Reacher do about that?" And the idea of him disappearing, I just thought, no, I can't let that happen.
I'm told you both have family connections to Wales. Your parents used to live in Brecon and your brother David is a teacher in the town. Is that right?
Yeah, David, I think he's retired now, but he moved to Brecon for the job, yeah. And it goes back even before that, because I grew up in Birmingham. And as you know, there was a sort of holiday habit for Midlands people, generally speaking, to go to North Wales for their holiday. So yeah, I mean, I've been going to Wales at least once a year, practically all my life. And then David moved there, And then my parents did that thing where they had been, my father had been working in London until he retired. And so they had a valuable house, and they did that thing of selling the valuable house and buying elsewhere that would be cheaper, so they would have cash to live on. And they chose Brecon because our brother lived there. So yeah, we had a little center of family in Wales, and we would go pretty often, yeah.
From my study window where I'm sitting just now, because I tell you the truth, I'm not actually in Aberystwyth, it's just a picture. The Brecon Beacons is through my study window here. It's an area I walk regularly and one I'm very fond of. It's also unaware how dangerous it can be and how important our local mountain rescue team is. In 2012, you donated £10,000 to the rescue to secure a new vehicle for them. What brought that about?
Well, David just told me about their situation. They had, it is all volunteer, as you know, mountain rescue, but the outfit he was with was incredibly professional, and they had a rescue vehicle that was the best of its kind, I understand. It was even copied by police and military because it was such a good vehicle, but it got wrecked and some kind of accident, and so they needed a replacement. And so I helped out with that fund because, you know, they're quite amazing, those mountain rescue people. As I say, volunteers, they don't get paid. There's nothing in it for them except public service. And they do all kinds of weird, dangerous things. You know, if you are out walking and you fall down or get lost, they'll come and find you. They've found dead bodies. David also has an expertise in water rescues, and so the rivers and so on. So it's quite a dramatic thing that they're doing, and deserves all the support they can get.
Have either of you ever climbed Pen y Fan or any of the nearby peaks, been out with David, for example?
Certainly not.
I've never done it with David, but the high school I went to has a field centre not too far from where you are right now, Matt. And I used to go. We would go as a matter of course once a year to that place. It was a kind of, you know, character building thing where they would take you there. It was incredibly basic. It was an old farmhouse where you basically kind of slept on the floor, or if you were lucky, you could scrounge up some kind of a mattress, and then you go from there as a base for some pretty long expeditions, including up Pen y Fan many times. And we also used that. We did my school did the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. So we, on top of the regular visits that we had there, I did my Duke of Edinburgh Silver and Gold Awards based from there. And they would involve going on, I think the Gold one was like a 5-day expedition. The Silver was a 3-day, I think. So yeah, we spent a great deal of time walking in the beacons, and some of my favorite memories, honestly. I love it up there.
Not your cup of tea though, Lee.
No, I avoid exercise if at all possible. My rule of thumb is like the only exercise I ever get is walking hospital corridors, visiting friends who have taken exercise. I have actually seen the Brecon Beacons very beautifully, actually. I was flying in from New York, and you've on the overnight flight, so in the morning you cross the tip of Southern Ireland, and then you fly directly over southern Wales. And it was this very low cloud, sort of fog, and so it was just a completely grey, flat surface with the 3 beacons sticking up out of the cloud. And it was lovely to look at, but looking at it is all I need to do.
Oh, it's very picturesque. Well, let's turn to the first of your desert island books. Andrew, let's start with you. What did you choose as your first desert island book to take on your desert island?
Well, the first one I picked is Ice Station Zebra by Alistair MacLean.
Okay,
and
here it is, Ice Station Zebra, the most successful British novelist of his time, says Jack Higgins. Yeah, incredible choice.
And it's a book I absolutely love for 2 reasons. One of them is because it's such a magnificent book. But the second reason is it holds this very special place in my heart, because when we left Birmingham, we moved, as Lee was saying, our father went to work in London, so we moved to a town near London. And they had the school had a very strange approach to teaching. It seemed that the teachers didn't really like doing any of it. So, for example, if you ever did any work, they refused to mark it. You know, they said, well, we'll tell you what work you should do. You can do it if you want, but either way, we're not marking it. We're not getting involved. So I told my mother this once. She wanted to know what mark I got on a geography test, and she knew I was useless at geography. So when I said, well, I don't know, she assumed that I'd failed and was just trying to cover it up. But no, the fact was that they didn't mark anything. And in the fourth year juniors, we had this thing where the teacher made us do these topics, as he called them, like little projects. So I did my first project and he wouldn't mark it. So I thought, right, if you're not going to mark it, I'm not going to do the work. So the rest of my time, the rest of the year, I just took books to school and I sat with a book under the table reading it. And normally I was pretty good at noticing if he occasionally he'd come out from behind his desk and wander around and see if he could catch people doing stuff. Normally I would spot him coming, but one day I was reading another book that nearly made it on the list, actually, Watership Down. Remember that book? Oh, yeah. And I was so engrossed in it, he caught me. I didn't notice him coming, so he pulls the book up from under the desk where I was hiding it and looked at it, and he turned to me and he said, "So, Grant, you think that you are a good reader, do you? Well, I'll tell you, you're not. You have got no idea." He said, "Unless you can pick up any book and read it without thinking, you're not a good reader." So at first I thought, okay, so read without thinking, what's that all about? But then, of course, that sounded like a challenge. So I thought, right, I'll show you. So I figured, oh God, no. So I figured when I get home, I will go to my dad's bookshelf and I will do exactly what he said. I will pick any book and I will read it. By the time I got home, the kind of adrenaline had passed, I was feeling a little nervous. I thought, well, what if he's right? What if I can't read the book? So I went, eyes closed, pulled a book off the shelf, and it was Ice Station Zebra. I was like 10 years old or something. So I'm thinking, wait, they have stations on the ice and there are zebras there? What's this all about? So I started reading the book and it just blew me away, because at that age, it was the first time I'd ever come across the idea of what we now know as the unreliable narrator. Basically, I'd always been brought up that books had facts in them. They told the truth. So when you read this story, the opening chapter is all about this guy blagging his way onto an American nuclear submarine in Scotland in order to get a ride to the North Pole. And, you go through this whole complicated rationale for why he should be allowed on the submarine. And, it's plausible, it's convincing, you go along with it. You get to the end of the chapter and you find out that he was totally lying. And it just blew my mind that you could have a situation where the main character in the book was lying. And because he's telling you, then, you feel drawn in and personally connected. So, yeah, it really, if you had to go back and pick one book, you mentioned the idea that not only were these enjoyable books, but books that had a huge impact on me, well, my career effectively, that would have to be the number one, because for that experience, that teacher, even though he did basically nothing else the entire year, he set me on this path. So, for that at least, I'm grateful.
Yeah, I think we are too. Right, Lee, how about you? What's your first choice?
I can't remember what order I gave them to you, and if you got the covers, I don't want to mess it up, but
I'll share it. There it is now.
There you go, another Alistair MacLean. Yeah, The Last Frontier. In the US, the title is Their Secret Ways. And that was, again, I was probably 10 or 11 when I read it. And it has 4 or 5 or 6 main heroes in it. And they are all just magnificent. And MacLean is pushing them to the very edge of being ludicrously magnificent, but never letting them fall off. And that really impressed me. They were so well drawn, absolutely to the max, but not an inch beyond. And also the tremendous paradigm of David versus Goliath, which is always the greatest conflict paradigm. And in those days, the KGB, or the Eastern European, the Soviet bloc secret police organizations, were the ultimate Goliath. They were all powerful, omniscient, everywhere. And so they were the perfect opponent. And so you had this small band of people fighting this huge state organization with tremendous depth and character and everything. But I do remember it mostly for this absolute paradigmical hero that is almost absurd, but not quite. And clearly that made an impression on me for later.
It's interesting. A couple of panels ago, we had Shona McLean being interviewed. And people were quite surprised to discover that she was Alistair's, or is Alistair's niece, which was quite a thing. She's also a historical crime fiction writer and doing very well as well. Andrew, who has the final say when you're writing together, if a decision needs to be made about what's going to happen to reach your heart, what direction it's going to go?
Well, that's an interesting question. And in a sense, we don't really have an answer to it, because when you say who has the final say if there's a decision to be made, that suggests a kind of conflict, or it suggests a clash of views. And one of the things that I've been most happy about and most pleasantly surprised about is that when we started this, neither of us had ever really written in any meaningful way with anyone else. Last time I tried it was when I was at university, which was a very long time ago, and it didn't go very well. So we had no idea how this was going to work. When Lee originally suggested the change, I think he was thinking more in terms of me just sort of stepping into his shoes. But then as we talked about it more, we decided it would be sensible to work together for the first 2 or 3. So the question then was, well, how do you work together? We didn't know. We'd never done it before. So we had to make it up as we went along. And there were 1 or 2 kind of touchstone moments early in the work on the Sentinel, where we talked about the kind of concept for the setting, for the type of story it was going to be. And then we had to think about, well, if we're doing that kind of story in that kind of place, how do we unfold that story? Where do we begin, and how does it develop? And so there's a critical part where at the beginning of the book, that Reacher arrives in the small town just as a bad thing is about to happen. So I had an idea for how I thought that beginning should be, and it turned out that Lee had pretty much had the same vision. So I think from that moment, that kind of gave us confidence that, we were working on this thing in the same way, going in the same direction. And then from there, I don't remember a single time actually where either of us wanted to do something different or didn't agree with what the other one wanted to do.
Lee, do you sit down in a room together and thresh out ideas, or do you do it like we are now over Zoom calls or telephone or something like that?
Well, I think we intended to, yeah, but the pandemic thing got in the way, and we were determined to take the medical stuff seriously. So we were isolating in separate bubbles. So we couldn't do that nose to nose across the table thing. So yeah, it generally was email, text, or phone. But to answer your previous question, if there is whose final word is it? This sounds slick, but actually Reacher, he takes the decision. Because if you've done the previous sequences correctly, there really is only one way that Reacher is going to go. So in a way, it's self-directed. If you've imagined the character properly, the story will tell itself. And that was really the only tiny incompatibility between us, in that Andrew prefers slightly more of a plan or an outline than I do. And my attitude is never outline. Don't have any preconceptions at all. Just see what happens. And that is what suits the Reacher books, that you just make it up minute by minute. And there's a certain inevitability about it. There really isn't a decision. If you arrive at a certain point, you've done A, B, C, then D sorts itself out. It happens for you. And E and F and G and so on. If your head is in the zone, then there really aren't those decisions to make.
Thank you. At the risk of boring our female viewers, what about football? Are you both Aston Villa supporters, or do your opinions differ on that score?
No, we both are. I was originally, of course, being that much older than Andrew. And so we did that thing where I would, you know, the older brother takes the younger brother to his first game. And we totally did that. And it was to Andrew's total credit that he's a Villa supporter, because the very first game I took him to was at Villa Park, and we got stuffed like 6-0 by Nottingham Forest. And so to have stuck with the Villa after that, and after many other disappointments, is a testament to Andrew's loyalty and character.
You do realise, of course, Andrew, that if you'd become a Nottingham Forest supporter after that day, you wouldn't be sitting here now.
That's probably true, actually, yeah.
And so is there any truth in the rumour that you use the name of players and staff in the books?
I always
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I used, in one of the very early books, there's a bad guy called Milosevic that everybody assumed was, you know, that Yugoslavian dictator guy, war criminal. But actually, no, it was Savo Milosevic, the useless Villa striker.
And does
Angel
get a mention as well?
Yeah, there is in one of the books is not his second name, because that's too distinctive, but there's an Angel Doll in one of the subsequent books, and some of them are subliminal or actually just coincidences. But the Villa always, the program editor at the Villa always writes, and because he's maintaining a database actually of previous Villa players who've been in Reacher books.
Is there a few?
Oh, dozens, absolutely. And managers too.
Great. Let's move on to your second book. Second choice, Lee, first of all. And here it is. Sophie's Choice.
This book is absolutely probably my favorite ever. And in this context of crime and thriller, it teaches you two things, really. One is that you can be very, very patient. This is a big, patient, I'm not going to say slow, because it's not at all slow, but it's discursive. It goes into everything in depth. So you can be patient, but it is an incredibly suspenseful book. And really, because of just one mechanism, you want to know what happened. It becomes clear that something traumatic has happened to Sophie. It becomes clear that it was some kind of a choice, and it becomes just that elemental. What was it? And that powers you through the book. And it really proved to me that a narrative engine can be as simple as you want it to be. It does not have to be complex or anything like that. It is, you just hook somebody with a question and they will read 600-700 pages, desperate to find out the answer.
As a book, did it influence your own writing style?
Yeah, I mean, I had this rather inchoate feeling about pace, where, I mean, a thriller traditionally has fast pace, but if you just do that all the time, then it becomes relentless and effectively the same as no pace at all. What the reader really needs is variety, variation, highs and lows, fast and slow. And that book really cemented that for me. You can afford to take, you know, in the modern context, 2, 3, 4 pages just to ruminate on something completely irrelevant. And that provides a little breathing space for the reader and is actually far more effective than just relentless, full-on speed.
Thank you. Andrew, your second choice. Len Deighton.
Here we go, Len Deighton. In a way, I kind of cheated here because, you know, you asked us to pick 4 books, and this, you know, this is one book in 3 trilogies. So 9 books he wrote in this particular series, and then actually really 10, because there was a final book that he wrote that kind of started again at the beginning and wrapped the whole thing up, looking at it from another perspective. So really you've got a sequence of 10 books here. You've got Game, Set and Match, Hook, Line and Sinker, and Faith, Hope and Charity. And then they're all wrapped up by one called Winter. And this is, again, something that was not only incredibly enjoyable to read, it was something that had a huge impact on me, because when I was at university, I did English and drama. And then after university, with a group of friends, I set up and ran a small theatre company, which was a fantastic experience in every regard, other than the fact that, you know, there's absolutely no money to be made if you run a small independent theatre company. So after a couple of years, I was dead broke, and I needed a job. So this was before the internet, so you have to buy the Sunday Times and look in the job section to see what's available. So I took a very scientific approach. What I did was I said, okay, which job that I'm qualified for has the highest starting salary, because I was broke. And there weren't any jobs that I was qualified for. So I said, okay, well, which one has the highest starting salary anyway? And I'll go for that one. So fortunately, I managed to get hired by British Telecom. And I had a job that was very busy. It was very time consuming. I was constantly on the road. And that meant I couldn't go to the theatre anymore. So I started reading more. And without really deliberately picking a genre or a style of book, I would just pick ones at the bookstore that seemed interesting. And it was only a few years later, when I kind of thought about it, when I looked back at the things I had been reading, that it dawned on me that I was focused on the, the kind of spy, crime, action, thriller type genre, which of course, was hugely important later. But I remember reading the first of that 3 trilogies on vacation one year in Greece. And I just, all the things I would normally do, I'd be lying on the beach reading the book, and I'd stop every now and again to swim or to get ice cream or whatever. I did none of that, because I was just so pulled into that the first in the series. And like Lee said, the idea that there's a question to be answered. In Game, the first one, you twig to the fact that because the book is about a guy called Bernard Sampson, who's an MI6 agent. And it's back in the Cold War era, so you have that Sampson, that David and Goliath thing, and you have this problem with him. He specializes in East Germany, so he's constantly having to get across the Berlin Wall. And you twig to the fact that within MI6, there's a traitor. And of course, once you realize this, you have to figure out who it is. So you are driven to keep reading and keep reading and keep reading. And he did this brilliant thing where he would juxtapose sections where Sampson is in enormous danger on the wrong side of the Berlin Wall with the Stasi chasing him, or the KGB, and then he's somehow got to get across the wall to safety. And then the next chapter, he's back at home in London, and his wife's not there because she also works for MI6, so that it's his week to look after the kids. And his big problem that week is there's no cornflakes. They've run out of breakfast cereal. And this idea that you have, so he made, for me anyway, he made the character relatable, because you read about somebody trying to get over the Berlin Wall. It's kind of exciting, but when do we ever have to do that? But all of us can relate to, oh God, there's no food for the kids. What are we going to do now? What can we feed them? What's the wife going to say when she comes back and found out I didn't? So there was a way in which not only did it set up that pacing thing that Lee talked about, where you've got periods of intense, insane action and other periods that are much slower and more mundane, but what it also did was it gave you a way that you could really relate to the character, and you could, because you knew you did some of the same things as him, you could then kind of gave you that bridge to imagining that you did the rest of the things that he did. And I thought it made it much more exciting and much more real.
Absolutely, yeah. And talking about 2 other really good books, The Sentinel and Better Off Dead, your first 2 collaborative works. Lee, what has Jack Reacher got in store for him in The Sentinel?
Well, the Sentinel, it was the first one we did together. And, you know, our discussions were basically that I believe the reader likes the main character to be well behind the curve in terms of technology. I think that the reader finds reassurance if the character knows less about phones and computers and so on than they do. There's something comforting about that. So I've always been very comfortable with Reacher being a bit of a klutz with technology, but it was getting to grotesque levels, really. I mean, he was basically a 19th century guy trying to get by in the 21st century. So the discussions that Andrew and I had was about bringing Reacher into the present day a little more. And so in order to do that, because Andrew's really good at plotting, probably better than I am. So I said, you do the plot, you do the story, bearing in mind we want slightly more up-to-date stuff. And so Andrew came up with the cybersecurity thing, which I never would have done. And he made Reacher a bit fingers and thumbs about it, but at least cognizant of the modern world. And so in that sense, it was exactly what we wanted to do, and it worked out perfectly. I think for Better Off Dead, the second one we've done, whereas the Sentinel was terrific, I thought, but Better Off Dead is I mean, we really hit the stride.
What has Better Off Dead got in store for us, Andrew?
Well, you know, we can't give too much away, but what I will tell you, because actually,
don't worry, we won't tell us.
This was in the I believe you. This was in the back of the UK version of the Sentinel paperback. So I'm not giving anything away that I shouldn't. But the way that Better Off Dead begins is that you've got this this shady scene takes place in a kind of precinct where there are a bunch of skeevy lock-up garages, right bang close up to the border fence between Arizona and Mexico. And there's a huge guy there. He's enormous, he's ugly, he's like a Neanderthal, really. And 4 guys show up and pick a fight with him. And of course, he wins the fight pretty easily, but then another character appears, a woman, and shoots him in the chest. The next scene you see is this guy is in the morgue. He's wheeled out of the, you know, that fridge where they keep the bodies. Mm-hmm. And somebody comes and inspects him because they want to see if he's really dead. And they confirm that he is. And then they look at his personal effects, and he doesn't have very many. He has some folded money. He has a toothbrush, and he has an expired passport with the name Jack Non-Reacher.
And say no more.
Okay. And that's where you get it.
Okay. I've got some quick fire questions from the Jack Reacher fan club on Facebook. Interestingly, I had to apply to join the fan club question on Facebook, and one of the opening questions was what is Jack Reacher's middle name? Now, I thought I'd missed something. So I don't ever recall it being mentioned. So has Jack got a middle name?
No, he does not. It was
a trick question, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, typically there are 2 ways of recording it, you know, in the military universe, either Jack Non-Reacher or Jack NMI Reacher for no middle initial. And I mean, it sort of dates, this was sort of, I remember taking that decision at the very beginning. I was very impressed with Michael Connolly at that point. He had a few books out, 3 or 4 at that point, and I knew that he was going to be huge. And so I thought, I'm going to do whatever Michael Connolly is not doing. So Connolly had his detective with a very cutesy, complicated name, Hieronymus Bosch, shortened to Harry. And I thought, all right, I'm going to have the simplest possible name with no middle name, no trickery at all. So it became Jack Reacher. It was either going to be Jack or Joe. So one of them ended up as Reacher and the other was his brother. So yeah, no middle name. And in fact, there's a collection of Jack Reacher short stories out called No Middle Name. So yeah, that's definitive.
Some quick questions from the fan club. Christine Edwards, Carmel McManus, John Laverty and Eric William would all like to know, is there any possibility the two of you might produce a prequel, more from Reacher's time in the military, perhaps?
I'm certain that we will. You know, we don't even plan sentence to sentence, so we certainly don't plan ahead, you know, book by book, but it is such a fertile ground, and I've done a few already, and they're fun to do. They work really well. It gives you the chance to do something a little different, you know, a younger character, a character that's maybe a little, you know, slightly more optimistic or naive or not fully formed. So it's a lot of fun to do from the writing point of view. You can tell great stories that way. So without ever making a plan, I would say, yeah, it's pretty much inevitable that there will be more prequels.
Great stuff. Andrew, will we see any more of Francis Neagley?
Well, you know, again, I'm kind of almost going to give the same answer. I would say almost certainly, but given the way that we don't plan too far ahead, it's very hard to say. But you know, she is a fantastic character. She's one of my favorites, and you know, typically the process works where you sit down and you get kind of the germ of a story. I can use this analogy again now because they're coming back into fashion, but you know those kind of instant cameras like the old Polaroids and the newer ones where you take the picture and the piece of paper comes out of the camera and at first it's all really blurry. You can tell there's something there, but you're not sure what it is yet. And as you look at it, it kind of comes into focus. It's kind of like that with a story. You get the germ of an idea, you feel that there's something there, and then the more you think about it, the more it comes into focus. So at some point, I'm sure that there will be a story that will need somebody like Neagley in it. So I would say, you know, without wanting to make a promise, I would say it's almost certain that we will. Yeah.
Another question from James Murphy for you, Andrew, is how have you reacted to reader feedback on the Sentinel, and will it affect the direction you take in future books?
Well, you know, that's a great question. You know, that's maybe one to answer in the pub one night. But, you know, the Reacher fans are a huge and loyal and passionate group. And so, you know, I'm one of them. I was the first one, and I know how they feel. I know how possessive they are about Reacher. I know what it feels like to wait 12 months for the next installment. So, you know, my goal more than anything was to do something that they would like and that they would enjoy. And you know yourself, Matt, writing a book isn't easy. You know, it takes a long time and it takes a lot out of you. So no one sets out to say, I want to write a book that people are going to hate. You know, that would be ridiculous. So, and I have that added incentive of knowing all about how, you know, the Reacher creatures feel. So, you know, if I see that somebody hasn't enjoyed the book, obviously that's disappointing. That's not what we set out to achieve. And, you know, I'm disappointed to see it. But on the other hand, first of all, you've got to say, did people give it a fair shot? Because if you think back to things like the response to Tom Cruise in the movies, a lot of the time, you know, you're encountering kind of knee-jerk reactions. And the other thing is, you know, you've got to set that against, you know, sure, there have been people that have not enjoyed the book, but there have been, you know, 20 million times more people.
Have you been reassured by the overwhelming reaction, which has been very positive?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the biggest thing I was nervous about at the beginning because, you know, like I say, you expose a lot of yourself in a book. You put an enormous amount of effort into it. And, you know, if it's not popular and successful, then you're doomed. And so, yeah, I was very nervous about it. And, you know, there's been a couple of outliers, but, you know, on the whole, the response has been so overwhelmingly positive and overwhelmingly, you know, accepting. It's been fantastic, and I'm extremely grateful to, you know, that vast majority of Reacher fans that have approached it with an open mind and have you know, reached the conclusion that they like what we're doing.
Okay, final quick fire question before we move on to book 3 and then the audience questions. This is from Vicky Sanders. Will you please, please, please be keeping the same narrator in Audible? Jeff Harding, of course.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff does the UK audio and is great. And I would, as much influence as we have, you know, which is, we can pretty much say yes or no. Yeah, I love Jeff and I will always want to work with him. And we're lucky in the States as well. And we had Dick Hill for a long, long time, who was a great narrator. But he wanted to retire, and so he did. And we were very lucky to get Scott Brick, who is just as good. And I think audiobooks are huge already, and they're going to be even bigger. And so the narrator becomes really a vital ingredient in that.
I've only ever heard the Jeff Harding versions, and he brings it to life. Absolutely.
He's great. Yeah.
Very, very.
Both Jeff and Scott are up for the Audiobook of the Year award. They both did such a fantastic job. So, you know, to be lucky enough to work with the people who are the front runners for that award in both sides of the Atlantic, we're very, very lucky.
That's pretty good going. Okay, let's move on to book 3. Let's start with Andrew this time. Andrew, the Myonic dossier, Charles McCarry.
Yeah, no, this is an absolutely fascinating book, I believe. Now, you know, as I mentioned earlier, years ago, I was involved in theatre. So I've always been interested in the mechanism of telling a story. You know, how do you do it? How do you get the idea from your head and communicate it to other people? And particularly with books, what you most often see is a kind of standard linear narrative. You know, you start at the beginning of the story and you work your way through to the end. And sometimes you mix that up a little bit by having a prologue, or you might have flashbacks along the way. But generally speaking, a story starts at the beginning and it goes through the middle until it reaches the end. And on top of that, you have a bunch of characters. You might see the story mainly from one of their points of view. You might mix up various different points of view. You might have people that are trustworthy and people that aren't. But what Charles McCarry did with this book, and all of his books are fantastic, by the way. He was a career CIA agent. Yeah, unfortunately, he died a couple of years ago. But so, you know, his books are so rich with the kind of fieldcraft and the authentic details that that you get from a lifetime of doing it for real. But what he did with this book, it is unlike pretty much any other book. It's really quite outrageous. There's no narrative. There are no characters in a standard way. What it is an idea that you have picked up a dossier, and you open like a file, you open it, and inside there are a bunch of documents. And you have to read those documents. Some of them are written by particular people, some of them are about particular people, some of them are describing certain situations, some are giving their opinion on things. You have to read this and you have to figure out what the story is. You know, you have to, and I just love that concept. You know, I'm just so jealous of it. I wish I thought of it first, because I just think it's brilliant. The idea that you can tell an entire story and you can create these characters, but without ever actually telling the story or having the characters. It's absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing it with us. Lee, your next choice.
Yeah, I think the next one was Daddy by Luke Durand.
That's right, here it is.
Yeah,
he's a genius. He has the key to $350 million locked in his head, and he's been hunted by the Nazis.
Yeah, that's the story. This prodigy boy who is a sort of savant in various ways, especially with numbers. He has the bank account numbers and the password numbers locked in his head for his dead father's fortune, which is in Switzerland, and the Nazis want it. They want that sum of money for the war effort. So there's a Gestapo guy and a bunch of soldiers hunting this kid. And it's memorable to me for two reasons. Firstly, that again, it is a hyper-realistic thriller in every way, except it is also firmly in the realm of fantasy, because everything is that they are so good at what they're doing. This little kid And his mother, who's a mysterious shadowy figure that we rarely or in fact never see, has these family retainers, these Spanish kind of villains who are the unofficial bodyguards who are shadowing this kid as well, always in the background. And there's a fabulous scene where the kid has got absolutely no knowledge at all that the people are there. He doesn't know that for sure. And he's confronted by the Gestapo guy who gives him an apple. So the kid tosses the apple in the air and catches it, you know, like kids do. Then he tosses it again and it explodes because it's been hit by a rifle bullet, just to intimidate the Germans. And so on both of those levels, it was a really good procedural thriller, but it also has this kind of glow of not supernatural at all, but superhuman ability about it. And it was also one of the last books that I kind of discovered at random. It was in fact quite a decent bestseller, especially in America, but it was pre-internet, back before we could all talk about books the way that we do now, without those recommendation networks that are now so sophisticated. Back when we just discovered things by accident. And I loved that feeling when you accidentally discovered a great book. And that's really probably the last one that I did before I got sucked into the business and you know everything, you know the buzz ahead of time, you know what's coming. There are very few random discoveries anymore.
Those random trips to the library where you flick through the shelves.
I really loved them, yeah.
And went home clutching a book of your latest exciting tales to
yeah, exactly like that.
Not many of us do that kind of thing anymore. Okay, I'm going to open up to Amy now. I hope she's listening in so she can switch on, and hopefully she'll have a series of audience questions ready for us. Hello, Amy.
Hi, everybody. There were so many questions, so many questions, so much that people want to know, and some really lovely comments as well. I'm just going to pick up with one comment before I go to the question. It's from a lady called Catherine. She says, thank you for promoting Mountain Rescue. Our team is so grateful for the support that you gave when we were in desperate need for a new control vehicle. So someone from that team is actually watching and is incredibly grateful for your support. So let's go to question. This one is for you, Andrew. Now that you are taking over, would you ever consider co-authoring a book with another author, like James Patterson, for example, and put Georgia and Alex Cross together?
That's a really great question, because you know, years ago I would have said I would never work with any author, but of course now, you know, I'm working with my brother. I don't honestly see myself working with anyone else though, because if you met, you know, James Patterson, for example, he has a very particular way of working. I've got several friends who have worked with him, and every single one of them has just got such incredibly positive and good things to say about Patterson himself and the process. But it's a very different thing that they do. And it relies very heavily on outlining, you know, working out the stories in advance, and then building from the outline to the finished novel. And like Lee was saying before, I do like to typically plan a little more than he does, but I certainly am not the kind of person that works with those kind of really detailed sort of structural outlines. So I don't think it would work for me to do that. But I do like the idea of, you know, when you have favorite characters from different authors and different series, what would happen if you brought them together. So I love the idea. I'm just not sure that the method of working would suit me really.
I suppose that kind of leads me into the next question. What has been the most enjoyable and the least enjoyable part of working together on you know, on these books?
For me, the least enjoyable has been the worry that he's going to do it better than I did it. You know, the way, obviously for my own ego, I would love them to be successful, but just like 99% of what I did. And I worry that they are likely to be 101% of what I did.
I mean, from my point of view, it's been, you know, it's almost like a dream come true, you know, to be working together, because years ago when I wanted to become a thriller writer, and I was working in the telecom industry in the UK, you know, I would hear stories about Lee going off to the different conferences and doing book events and things like this one. And I wanted to be part of it. You know, I dreamed of being part of it, even just on my own. So getting to be part of it with my big brother is just unbelievable. It's the best thing ever. I think the hardest thing for me, really, kind of going back to the previous question, is knowing that there's this weight of expectation from all of the fellow Reacher fans all around the world, and just hoping that I can do a good enough job and keep everybody happy and satisfied long into the future.
Fantastic. We have a question for you, Lee. He says, as Reacher is the quintessential protector of women, fact driven by, you know, your own mum and her way of living.
Sorry, I didn't hear that completely. You locked up a little bit in the middle.
Sorry. Again, I think my connection's a little bit. So Tony asks, as Reacher, essential protector of women,
right?
So with such grace and class, is that fact driven by your own mother? She must have been an amazing woman.
Yeah, I mean, Reacher is, I tend to think of him as sort of he's a very logical and rational person. And so we do live in this absurd world where there's a debate about it. You know, are women inferior or in some way? And Reacher is just astonished by that anybody would ask that question. Of course, women are equal. And so he's a kind of post-feminist and he will cheerfully kill a woman or, you know, shout at one or anything like that. He's not courteous necessarily in that sense. But it's not that he believes in equality. It's self-evident to Reacher. And so where did that come from? I mean, to an extent from my mother, I suppose, although I didn't actually like her that much. She was not a nice woman or a good parent, but she was a woman of ability, and that was part of her problem, that she was a woman of ability at a time when there were no opportunities. It was inconceivable that she would go to university, given her background. Then she got a job in the civil service where she was doing really well, except when she got married, she had to leave. It was married women could not work for the civil service. So all along she had these various obstacles that did in fact make me believe, yeah, we live in this absurd world where we have a hierarchy of people. And looking back on it, my entire lifespan really has been about, I was born in what was explicitly a white man's world. And since then, we've been trying to get to a point where everybody else gets a chance as well. And it's a very slow process. And if Reacher can help, then good.
I'm just keeping an eye on my connection. I might have to turn my camera off if it starts to get a bit slow again. But the next question, I think the final question that we have time for really, is that both of you. It says, we've all had more time over the last year to read. What is the best book that you've read in that time?
Wow, that is a great question. And we certainly have. But I mean, most of my lockdown time was spent reading the Booker Prize submissions, because I was a Booker judge last year and we had 162 novels to read between January and July. And so that was the bulk of my reading. And there were some exceptional books there. I mean, obviously the winner and the shortlist and so on, but along the way, there were some tremendous ones. So I would nominate probably 6 or 10 out of that Booker list that did not make it even to the long list. They were really great. And what I did was, I also was hired to write the introduction for the 50th anniversary edition of The Day of the Jackal, which is this year, 50 years since that first book came out. So I reread that. And actually that is a tremendous thriller still. It is just, even though it's now 50 years out of date in a lot of its methodology, that is a hell of a book. So that, as a rediscovery, I would say that was a great one.
Well, for me, it's not a very. I think the one I would pick is, it's not recently published, I don't believe, but it's one that I've read recently. It's a little bit like Lee was saying about the old days when you just sort of came across books rather than had them recommended or anything like that. Back in the days where you could do these kind of events in person at bookstores and so on, I always loved to get there a bit early and poke around and see what's on the shelves. And I picked this book up more or less by chance, just because it struck me that it sounded interesting. It was going to be my fourth choice. It's by a guy called Ed Lynn, and it's called Ghost Month. And it's a thriller. It's not what you'd call, like a high stakes, high concept thriller. It's quite, the story is quite easy. Here we go. But it's set in Taiwan. And the thing that really intrigued me about it was, without it being kind of overwhelming, it just gave you a lovely insight into a different country, a different culture, different set of beliefs, different way of doing things. And so because you had the thriller element, it starts off with a woman's been murdered, and the guy who knew her at college wants to figure out what happened. And so there are plenty of aspects to it that are familiar, but at the same time, there are lots of other ones that are just that little bit different to what we're used to. And I thoroughly enjoyed reading it, because I felt like I was learning stuff, and I felt that it always had this extra dimension of information about things that I had no knowledge of before. And I'm a very curious person. I always like finding out new things, and so the way that the author very subtly and very effectively weaved these aspects of Taiwanese culture into the framework of a story that made it very accessible, I thought it was fantastic. So I would thoroughly recommend that one.
I loved that one too. I think I even blurbed it, possibly. I remember getting a pre-publication copy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much both for answering the questions. We had so many more. We honestly could have gone on for another 3, 4, 5 hours with all the questions that we had, but hopefully we'll get to do something in person soon, and the audience way.
Thank you, Amy.
I'm going to leave you now with Matt. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Okay, let's do Lee's final choice. The final choice of book.
Yeah, which would be Gorky
Probably
Park.
my favourite, this one. Yeah,
by Martin Cruz Smith. And in fact, having just said I did the 50th anniversary forward for Frederick Forsyth, I'm doing the 40th anniversary edition for this. And yes, it's a great story, a great thriller. It is beautifully in that European tradition of the sort of dour detective that Per Walu and Mai Shawal first started out with Martin Beck, and then the sort of Scandinavian, or really sort of starting with Maigret, probably the normal guy as the detective. And but of course, for me, the thing that stood out about it was when I was starting out in England writing about America with Jack Reacher, it was tremendously reassuring to me, because he had created this tremendously plausible and convincing portrait of Moscow and Russia. And I thought to myself, well, he's been there less than I've been to America, that's for damn sure. And so if he can do it, I can do it. So it was a little boost to me, that book.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing your choices with us. Before we conclude, it's one final and all-important question. If you had the opportunity to live anywhere in the world for a year while writing a book that took place in that setting, which part of Wales would you choose?
Well, I mean, I don't know. The sort of South Wales coast coastal cities are the grittiest, I think. But I would probably go back to North Wales, where we went for vacations as kids, and you know, some rural, remote place, some grotesque happenings in a stone farmhouse somewhere. So I'm going to say Tallybont. I can't remember exactly where that is, but it's where we went for our holidays for many years. So I would revisit that.
Fantastic, beautiful. It's a beautiful place. Beautiful. What about you, Andrew?
Well, you know, if you'd asked me this question an hour ago, I'd have given a different answer, but I enjoyed that video at the beginning so much. I've never been to Aberystwyth. I once had an argument with a woman at a literary festival in America who tried to claim that Aberystwyth was in England. That's, you know, but I've never been. But having seen the video at the beginning, I was sold. So I think just out of you know, being purely self-interested, I would say, yeah, I'll come to Aberystwyth and live there for a year.
If it's any consolation to you, I've been on holiday and met people who think Wales is in England.
Yeah.
So, that doesn't go down terribly well. And that's a lovely note on which to end. Thank you both. All that remains now is to say thanks to Lee and Andrew for joining us. It's been both a pleasure and an honour. And many thanks to our audience for joining us this evening and for your brilliant questions. Thank you. Just to remind you that if you'd like to buy the Sentinel or others in the Jack Reacher series, or even my books, if you're so minded, please consider clicking through the programme page to Griffin Books, our featured bookshop. Finally, on behalf of Gŵyl Crime Cymru Festival Online, I'd like to wish you all good night, nos da, and we hope to see you again in Aberystwyth next year. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.